The void whispered secrets to those who knew how to listen. The Kthar listening post, designated Outpost Epsilon 7, was not, however, attuned to such subtleties. Its sensors, calibrated for the clumsy thrum of hyperdrives and the flare of conventional weaponry, registered the anomaly as a flicker, a distortion too brief to be credible. Yet, it persisted. A ghost in the machine of their detection grids. They were the Xylosian hegemony, self-proclaimed arbiters of galactic peace, a peace maintained through the judicious application of overwhelming force and a finely tuned arrogance. Their civilization spanned 1,000 worlds, their fleets were legend, their bureaucracy an art form of intricate, suffocating power. The notion of a true unknown, a genuine threat emerging from the unexplored dark, was more a subject of academic amusement than serious strategic concern. The anomaly resolved. Not with a roar, but with a chilling silence. A ship, unlike any recorded in the Xylosian comprehensive databanks, drifted into the Epsilon 7 system. It was a brutalist sculpture of scarred, dark metal, pitted and ancient, yet exuding a latent power that made the station's instruments whine in protest. It bore no insignia recognized by the Galactic Concord, no transponder squawking allegiance to any known power. It simply was. Commander Valerius of Epsilon 7, a Xylosian of middling ambition and substantial self-regard, ordered a standard hail. The response was silence. He ordered a warning shot across its bow, a precise lance of particle energy designed to intimidate, not destroy. The dark ship did not react. Its shields, if it possessed any, did not flare. It merely absorbed the energy, a black hole swallowing light. Valerius, his composure fraying, reported to High Command. Unidentified vessel, non-responsive, absorbing energy fire. Possible derelict, but, unsettling, the word unsettling was an understatement. The ship pulsed with a wrongness, a subtle defiance of known physics that prickled at the edges of his perception. High Command, nestled deep within the glittering spires of Xylos Prime, treated the report with predictable condescension. Admiral Krell, a veteran of countless pacification campaigns against uppity primitives, chuckled. A derelict, Valerius? Perhaps some forgotten pirate's bauble. Send a boarding party. Catalog its trinkets. And do try not to misplace any of your shiny new recruits in the process. The boarding party, 5 heavily armed Xylosian Marines, breached the silent ship's hull with surprising ease. They found corridors slick with a strange, dark residue, and an atmosphere thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and predatory. The internal architecture was utilitarian, built for function over any conceivable aesthetic, and disturbingly, organic in its flow, despite being entirely metallic. In what they presumed was the command deck, they found the source of the ship's lingering life signs. Not crew, but a single, crystalline data core, still faintly glowing. Attached to it was a metallic plaque, etched in a stark, angular script they couldn't decipher, and below it, in crudely translated galactic standard, property of Sol Federation. Origin, Terra. Classification, Class 15 Deathworld. The Marines exchanged uneasy glances. Class 15 Deathworld. Such a classification was theoretical, a hypothetical construct for planets so hostile that complex life, let alone sentient, spacefaring life, was deemed impossible. Gravity wells that could crush stars, atmospheres of molten neurotoxins, fauna that were walking ecological disasters. Pure fantasy. One Marine, a younger officer named Lyra, ran the script through her universal translator. It struggled, then offered a single, chilling word: humanity. The data core, when accessed, revealed fragmented logs. Tales of a world that was a constant war for survival, of impossible pressures, of life that had to evolve unimaginable resilience just to draw breath. It spoke of a species that had clawed its way to sentience against a backdrop of cataclysm and predation that would have sterilized most garden worlds 1,000 times over. It spoke of internal conflicts, brutal and savage, that had tempered them further. Valerius transmitted the findings. The term, Class 15 Deathworld, and humanity, caused a brief stir in the lower echelons of Xylotian intelligence. Most analysts dismissed it as primitive boasting, the fantasy of a long-dead or insignificant species. Terra, the logs indicated, was the third planet in an uncharted system designated Sol, a system deemed too close to a volatile stellar nursery to warrant serious exploration. Admiral Krell, however, saw an opportunity. A Deathworld, you say? How quaint. Perhaps these humans have some novel biological quirks we could exploit. Or perhaps their desolate little rock holds untapped resources. Send the third pacification fleet. Survey the Sol system. If there are any remnants of these humans, offer them the hegemony's benevolent guidance. Their compliance, of course, is non-negotiable, he added, almost as an afterthought, and if they prove recalcitrant, make an example. A swift, decisive demonstration of Xylotian resolve is always good for morale in the outer territories. The arrogance was a physical thing, a miasma that choked wiser counsel before it could be voiced. The third pacification fleet, a gleaming armada of 50 warships, arrived in the Sol system 3 standard months later. They found no grand civilization, no bustling orbital habitats. Only the cold, red dust of Mars, where a small, fledgling research colony and a modest orbital station represented humanity's tentative outreach. They were not warriors, they were scientists, engineers, families. Their defense grid was rudimentary, designed more for meteoroids than warships. The Xylotian commander, Prefect Varkos, a protégé of Krell, delivered the ultimatum. You are now under the protection and authority of the Xylotian hegemony. Your world, your resources, your very lives belong to us. Comply, and you may find a place as servants. Resist, and you will be dust. The Martian colonists, barely numbering 10,000 souls, refused. Their reply was broadcast across all channels, a quiet statement of defiance from Governor Eris Thorne. We are human. We are free. We will not yield. Varkos, with a theatrical sigh of feigned regret, ordered the bombardment. It was not a battle, it was an extermination. The Xylotian fleet unleashed its power, kinetic impactors and particle beams turning the delicate domes of Marsport into craters of molten glass and irradiated dust. The orbital station, Alexandria, fought back with desperate, ineffective missile volleys before being shattered into a million glittering fragments. Varkos ensured the entire atrocity was recorded, every scream, every explosion, to be used as propaganda, a stark warning to any other minor species contemplating defiance. They even strafed the escape pods, a final act of casual cruelty. What the Xylotians did not know, what they could not comprehend, was that one heavily damaged freighter, the Odysseus, its hull breached and its crew mostly dead, managed to engage its experimental stealth drive just as the bombardment began. Its mission had been a simple cargo run. Now, it carried a different payload, the unedited, high-resolution recording of Marsport's annihilation, and the dying testament of Governor Thorne, his voice choked with dust and grief, but his eyes burning with an unholy light. His last words were not for his people, but for his son, an officer in the Sol Defense Force stationed near Earth. Remember Mars, Leonidas. Remember what they did. The Odysseus, a ghost ship leaking atmosphere and sanity, limped back towards Earth, carrying the seeds of a terrible reckoning. The galaxy, content in its ignorance and its hierarchies, continued its grand, oblivious dance. The Xylotian hegemony celebrated another successful assertion of its dominance. They had poked the hornet's nest. They had no idea the hornets were dragons. The arrival of the Odysseus was not a public event. It was a specter slipping through Earth's sensor net, broadcasting its horrifying cargo directly to the highest echelons of the Terran Confederacy. The footage from Mars, raw and unsparing, played out in secure briefing rooms, on the private screens of generals and presidents. The silence that followed was heavier than any grief. It was the silence of a species pushed beyond the precipice of endurance, into a place cold and terrible. Humanity, for all its internal squabbles, its nations and ideologies, had always been defined by its shared crucible, Earth. The Class 15 Deathworld had forged them in fire, had culled the weak and rewarded the adaptable, the stubborn, the utterly relentless. They understood loss. They understood brutality. They had inflicted it upon themselves for millennia. But this casual, arrogant obliteration of 10,000 souls, a fledgling dream snuffed out for sport and broadcast as a warning, this was different. The grief was a tidal wave, silent and devastating. Then came the rage. Not a hot, impulsive anger, but a cold, crystallizing fury that settled deep in the bones of their collective consciousness. Borders on Earth, political factions, economic rivalries, they did not vanish overnight, but their significance dwindled to microscopic proportions against the stark, unifying trauma of Mars. In a secret conclave, deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, the remnants of Earth's disparate leadership gathered. Among them was Commander Leonidas Thorne, his face a mask of stone, his father's last words echoing in his soul. He laid the data crystal from the Odysseus on the central table. "They call us primitives," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. "They call our home a Deathworld and laugh. They murdered our people to make a point. There can be only one response." The vow was not sworn with grand pronouncements or televised speeches. It was a quiet consensus, a shared intake of breath in the dark. Never again. Never again would humanity be so vulnerable. Never again would they be prey. What the Zylocians had intended as a lesson in obedience became a catalyst for a terrifying transformation. And so began the Great Silence. To the wider galaxy, what little of it had even noticed the Mars incident, it appeared as if the nascent human civilization had collapsed under the blow, or perhaps had simply faded back into the obscurity from which it had briefly emerged. Zylocian patrols near the Sol system reported no activity. No transmissions. No ships. Earth, it seemed, had drawn a shroud over itself. Behind that shroud, humanity was remaking itself. The full, terrifying potential of a species born from a deathworld, a species that had to innovate or die on a daily basis, was unleashed. The research labs that had once struggled for funding now had unlimited resources. The brightest minds, once scattered across myriad disciplines, were now focused on a singular purpose, survival, and then, retribution. They delved into the forbidden sciences, the theoretical physics that other, more cautious races had shied away from. Gravity as a weapon, not just a force. Spacetime as a shield, not just a medium. Nanotechnology that could deconstruct matter atom by atom. They studied the Zylocian technology from the derelict scout ship, from the wreckage they could subtly salvage from the fringes of the Mars massacre, reverse engineering its strengths, identifying its weaknesses with predatory focus. The black vaults of Earth, repositories of forgotten lore and dangerous ideas, were thrown open. Theories deemed too radical, too unstable, were dusted off and re-examined. They learned to manipulate zero-point energy, not just to power their cities, but to unravel the fabric of their enemies. They developed cognitive warfare engines, AIs like Cassio, cold analytical strategic sentient intelligence engagement lattice, designed not just to process data, but to predict, to deceive, to shatter an enemy's will to fight before a shot was even fired. Society itself was reforged. Children grew up on stories of Mars, not as a tragedy, but as a promise. The arts depicted not pastoral serenity, but the stark beauty of controlled power, the grim necessity of sacrifice. The military was not just an arm of the state, it was the state, its purpose woven into the DNA of every citizen. Leonidas Thorne, promoted rapidly through the ranks, became Grand Admiral of the newly unified Sol Armada, his face a symbol of their icy resolve. He rarely spoke of Mars, but his eyes held the reflection of its burning cities. Decades passed. 50 years. A lifetime for some, a mere breath for galactic powers. The Zylocian hegemony had largely forgotten the Sol system, a minor footnote in their glorious history. They had fought other wars, pacified other upstarts, expanded their empire. The warning from Mars had, they believed, served its purpose. Then, on the 50th anniversary of the Mars atrocity, the silence broke. It began not with a declaration of war, but with an absence. The Xylosian listening post, Epsilon 7, the very station that had first detected the lone human derelict, went silent. One moment it was transmitting its regular status reports, the next, nothing. Just a void where telemetry should have been. The hegemony, in its bureaucratic sloth, took 3 days to register it as an anomaly. Then, the Xylosian naval base at Cygnus Prime, a major staging area for their frontier fleets, vanished from the galactic net. Not destroyed in a blaze of glory, not overrun by pirates. It simply ceased to exist. One moment, a bustling hub of 10,000 warships and 1 million personnel. The next, sensor readings showed only vacuum, laced with exotic particles that baffled Xylosian science. No debris. No radiation spike. Just, gone. Panic, a sensation unfamiliar to the Xylosian High Command for centuries, began to take root. This was not the work of rebels or pirates. This was something else. Something cold, precise, and terrifyingly efficient. Into this growing unease, the human fleet emerged. They did not arrive through conventional hyperspace jump points, flaring into existence with telltale energy signatures. They simply appeared, slipping between the folds of spacetime, their hulls darker than the void itself, absorbing all light, all sensor scans. They were not ships as the Xylosians understood them, they were predators sculpted from solidified night, their forms sharp, angular, utterly alien. They bore no lights, broadcast no signals, offered no hails. Their silence was more menacing than any war cry. Leading this phalanx of shadows was the flagship Nemesis, Grand Admiral Leonidas Thorne's personal command. It was a colossal vessel, larger than any Xylosian dreadnought, yet it moved with the grace of a striking viper. Its surface shimmered, not with energy shields, but with localized distortions of gravity, bending light and sensor beams around it. Their first target was the Xylosian 7th Fleet, the very fleet Prefect Varkos had commanded during the Mars bombardment, now under a new, equally arrogant commander. The 7th Fleet was on patrol near the Orion Nebula, conducting deterrence exercises, a euphemism for bullying neutral systems. The human attack was not a battle, it was a dissection. Weapons that defied Xylosian understanding flickered into life. Beams of coherent gravity crushed Xylosian cruisers into singularities. Torpedoes that phased through shields detonated within engine rooms, unraveling ships from the inside out. Nanite swarms, invisible to sensors, consumed hulls, leaving behind only drifting skeletons of metal. The Xylosian ships, bristling with weaponry that had cowed a dozen species, found their fire useless. Energy bolts dissipated harmlessly against the gravitational lensing of the human vessels. Missiles were swatted aside by pinpoint defensive systems or simply vanished, their guidance systems scrambled by unseen forces. The Xylosian commander, his face a mask of disbelief and terror, watched his fleet being unmade. "What are they?" he shrieked into the comms, his voice cracking. "What are these things?" The only reply came not from the humans, but from his own tactical AI, its synthesized voice flat with dawning horror. Energy signatures match no known classification. Weapon effects are not possible. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Withdrawal was a fantasy. The human fleet moved with a coordination that seemed almost precognitive, Cassiel and its subordinate AIs orchestrating the annihilation with cold, mathematical precision. They herded the remnants of the 7th Fleet into a kill box, then, with a final, devastating salvo, erased them from existence. 70 Xylosian warships, thousands of lives, gone in under an hour. No survivors. No wreckage that could be meaningfully analyzed. Only the faint, lingering scent of ozone and the chilling whisper of exotic particles. Then, and only then, did the humans break their silence. A single, encrypted transmission, broadcast on all Xylosian emergency frequencies. It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a declaration of war. It was the complete, unedited recording of the Mars atrocity, 50 years prior. The screams of the dying, the arrogant pronouncements of Prefect Varkos, the gleeful commentary of Xylosian gunnery officers as they targeted escape pods. It played on a loop, a stark, undeniable indictment. Accompanying the footage was a simple text message, displayed in stark Xylosian script: "We remember Mars." The galaxy, which had barely registered humanity's existence before, reeled. The arrogant pronouncements of the Xylosian hegemony, their carefully crafted image of benevolent strength, shattered. Disbelief warred with a primal fear. Who were these humans? Where had they come from? And what other horrors did their Class 15 Deathworld forge in its heart? The first strike was a shockwave. The subsequent campaign was a slow, inexorable tide of black dread. Humanity did not engage in grand fleet battles unless forced. Their strategy was one of calculated, systemic dismantling, executed with chilling precision. They targeted Xylosian military infrastructure, communications relays, logistical hubs, and symbols of their power. One by one, Xylosian fortresses fell silent. Not always destroyed, sometimes merely isolated. Hyperlanes leading to crucial industrial worlds would simply cease to function, the space-time within them subtly warped, rendering transit impossible. Communication arrays would overload, broadcasting not propaganda, but the silent, watching faces of Martian children, their images taken from the colony's archives moments before their deaths. Psychological warfare was a cornerstone of their offensive. The Cassiel network, utilizing its deep understanding of Xylosian psychology gleaned from decades of covert observation and analysis of the initial derelicts' data, sowed targeted discord. False orders sent Xylosian fleets on wild goose chases. Doctored intelligence reports turned allies against each other within the hegemony's increasingly fractured command structure. Whispers of human infiltrators, of impossible stealth technology, spread like a virus, eroding morale. Xylosian soldiers started seeing shadows in every corner, doubting their own sensors, their own comrades. The Xylosian hegemony, so accustomed to being the predator, found itself hunted. Their fleets, designed for overwhelming firepower against less sophisticated opponents, were clumsy and predictable against human tactics. Human ships would appear from nowhere, strike with devastating effect, and vanish before a coherent response could be mounted. They used feints, gravitational decoys that mimicked entire battlegroups, drawing Xylosian forces away from actual targets. Admiral Krell, the architect of the Mars tragedy, now ancient but still clinging to power, raged impotently from Xylos Prime. He demanded retribution, swift and total. He ordered his fleets to find and annihilate the human homeworld, Sol. But Sol was a ghost. Human ships operated from mobile void fortresses, cloaked in spacetime distortions, their locations impossible to pinpoint. Earth itself was shielded by layers of defenses so esoteric that Xylosian probes attempting to approach it simply ceased to transmit, their constituent atoms likely unraveled and repurposed. Desperate, Krell authorized the use of planet breaker torpedoes against suspected human staging areas in uninhabited systems, weapons of such indiscriminate destruction that their use was condemned even by the hegemony's own twisted code of warfare. The human response was to broadcast the launch codes for these weapons, along with their precise yields and fallout patterns, to every neutral system bordering Xylosian space. The message was clear: this is the nature of your benevolent masters. What terrified the Xylosians, and the watching galaxy, most was the dawning realization that humanity was still holding back. The weapons they deployed were terrifying, yes, but there were subtle indications, whispers in the energy signatures, anomalies in the gravitational aftermath of their attacks, that suggested far greater capabilities held in reserve. Tales began to circulate among Xylosian intelligence analysts, fragmented reports from doomed ships, of fleeting glimpses of technologies that violated known laws of physics, ships that momentarily blinked out of reality, energy fields that seemed to draw power from other dimensions. They spoke of something called Nemesis Protocol, a rumored ultimate sanction that humanity had yet to unleash. The human fleet was not driven by passion, but by a cold, unwavering purpose. Grand Admiral Thorn, aboard the Nemesis, directed the campaign with the detached precision of a surgeon excising a cancer. His orders were concise, his demeanor unreadable. Captain Eva Rostova, his flag captain, sometimes watched him during the long, silent vigils on the bridge, seeing the ghost of Mars flicker in his eyes. Admiral, Rostova ventured one cycle, as they observed the systemic unraveling of another Xyloshan sector command. Is this justice? Or is it becoming something else? Thorn's gaze remained fixed on the tactical display, where Xyloshan icons winked out of existence. Justice, Captain, he replied, his voice a low rumble, is a concept they themselves defined for us on Mars. We are merely delivering it, in a language they can no longer afford to misunderstand. They sowed the wind. They are reaping the whirlwind. And the storm has only just begun to gather. The strain on the Xyloshan hegemony became unbearable. Systems, terrified of becoming the next target of human retribution or disgusted by the newly revealed depths of their rulers' cruelty, began to secede. Client races, long chafing under the Xyloshan yoke, saw their opportunity and rose in open rebellion, sometimes armed with anonymous data drops detailing critical Xyloshan vulnerabilities, data that bore the unmistakable, cold logic of Cassiel. Faith in the high command on Xylos Prime evaporated. Admiral Krell, increasingly erratic, ordered the activation of Project Chimera, a desperate gambit involving experimental biological agents and self-replicating drone swarms, weapons of last resort, crude and uncontrollable. The project was housed in a secret facility in the Gorgon Nebula. Before the order could be fully executed, the Gorgon Nebula itself was pacified. Not by ships, but by a wave of precisely targeted nanites that disassembled Project Chimera at the molecular level, leaving the facility inert but otherwise intact, a monument to Xyloshan desperation and human reach. The message was implicit: we know all your secrets. Facing total collapse, Krell and his inner circle authorized the deployment of the Void Casket, an ancient artifact of a precursor race, a supposed superweapon whose true function was poorly understood. They aimed it at a region of space they believed concealed a major human fleet anchorage. The Void Casket activated, not with a bang, but with a reality-shredding groan. It tore a hole in spacetime, true, but not where the Xyloshans intended. Instead, it destabilized the hyperlane network leading directly to Xylos Prime, their capital, effectively cutting them off from their remaining loyalist forces. The weapon, in its indiscriminate hunger, had backfired spectacularly, isolating the serpent in its own nest. Humanity hadn't even needed to intervene, Xyloshan arrogance had, once again, been their most effective enemy. With their supply lines severed and their fleets in disarray, the heart of the hegemony was exposed. The human armada, led by the Nemesis, translated into high orbit above Xylos Prime. They did not bombard. They did not deploy troops. They simply hung there, a silent, obsidian constellation of judgment against the backdrop of Xylos's triple suns. Below them, the glittering cities, the symbols of millennia of Xyloshan dominance, trembled. Grand Admiral Thorn stood on the bridge of the Nemesis, gazing at the world that had birthed the orders for Mars's destruction. Captain Rostova stood beside him, the silence thick with unspoken questions. The Cassiel network presented him with options: total orbital sterilization, targeted decapitation strikes against remaining leadership, deployment of psychological dampeners to induce mass surrender, or even simply leaving a permanent blockade. Admiral, Rostova finally said, her voice quiet. They are broken. They offer unconditional surrender. What are your orders? Thorn looked at the image of Xylos Prime, a world teeming with billions of lives, most of them innocent of the crimes of their leaders, yet all beneficiaries of the hegemony's brutal expansion. He thought of Mars, of the ashes of his family, of the 50 years of cold, hard preparation. The desire for absolute annihilation was a physical ache, a dark song thrumming in his blood. This was the moment. The culmination. He could unmake them. He could silence their culture, erase their history, salt their worlds. It was within his power. The Nemesis Protocol, a weapon system that could initiate a controlled chain reaction in a planet's core, was armed and awaiting his command. A single word, and Xylos Prime would become a short-lived star. Instead, he spoke 2 words to the comms officer. Broadcast this. Across Xylos Prime, on every viewscreen, every public display, every private device, an image appeared. Not of warships, not of looming destruction. It was a single, red Martian rose, painstakingly reconstructed from pre-bombardment botanical data, blooming in time-lapse against a backdrop of barren, cratered plains. Then, the image dissolved, replaced by a simple text in Xylosian. You were warned. You did not listen. We remembered. We acted. This conflict is over. Your hegemony is dissolved. Your fleets are dust. Your leaders will answer for their crimes, not to us, but to those you subjugated. We offer no forgiveness, for that is not ours to give. We offer only this, a single chance. Do not make us return. We will not be so restrained a second time. The human fleet did not fire a single shot at Xylos Prime. After holding orbit for 1 full Xylosian day, a silent, terrifying vigil, they turned, as one, and vanished back into the impossible geometries of their FTL, leaving behind a stunned, broken civilization and a galaxy forever changed. The fall of the Xylosian hegemony was not just a military defeat, it was the shattering of an epoch, the realization that the old rules no longer applied. Power had a new, terrifying face, and it was human. The aftermath of the Xylosian Human War, as it came to be known, though humans never formally called it a war, preferring terms like corrective action or the reckoning, sent ripples of shock and transformation across the entire galactic quadrant. The Xylosian hegemony, once a monolithic empire, fractured into 100 squabbling successor states, petty tyrannies, and desperate democracies, many of which immediately faced insurrections from species emboldened by humanity's victory. Humanity itself became the new galactic enigma, the ultimate power, yet one that sought no empire, claimed no territory beyond the Sol system and a few heavily fortified, cloaked starbases at strategic points. They did not govern, they merely were. A silent, brooding presence at the edge of known space. Their ships, rarely seen, became a source of immense dread and speculation. To some, they were saviors, the ultimate check against tyranny. To others, they were a far greater menace than the Xylosians had ever been, precisely because their motives remained opaque, their full capabilities unknown. Other oppressed species, witnessing the swift and total dismantling of a superpower, began to stir. The Thar Confederacy, long-suffering neighbors of the Xylosians, launched their own campaigns of liberation, their battle cries echoing human sentiments, remember Xylos. Remember Mars. The phrase, Class 15 Deathworlders, became a whispered epithet, a term of both fear and grudging respect. Some ambitious species even tried to emulate human ship designs, creating crude, angular vessels painted black, hoping to borrow some of their terrifying mystique. These attempts were usually met with contempt or disaster. Within humanity, the victory was met not with joyous celebration, but with a profound, somber exhaustion. The single-minded focus that had driven them for 50 years began to fray, replaced by unsettling questions. They had achieved their vengeance. They had ensured their security. Now what? Grand Admiral Thorne, hero of the reckoning, found himself adrift in the silence that followed. He had lived for vengeance, and with its consummation, a part of him had died. Factions began to emerge within the Sol High Command. The Praetorians, led by younger officers who had only known the war, argued for a more active role in galactic affairs, preemptive pacification of other potentially hostile powers, the establishment of a human-enforced galactic order. They saw humanity's power as a tool to be wielded, a responsibility to shape the future. We cannot simply stand by while new tyrannies rise from the ashes of the old, argued Commander Valerius Cade, a charismatic officer whose rhetoric was gaining traction. We have the power to ensure peace. Real peace. Not the Xylosian version. Opposing them were the Sentinels, a more cautious faction, often including veterans like Captain Rostova, who had witnessed the full cost of the war. They advocated for isolation, for focusing on internal development and maintaining a defensive posture. "We avenged Mars," Rostova stated in a closed council meeting, her voice firm. "We are not galactic police. If we try to impose our will on the galaxy, we become the very thing we fought against. We become the new Xylosians." The debate over Cassiel and its sibling AIs also intensified. The cognitive warfare engines had been instrumental, but their capacity for manipulation, for understanding and exploiting alien psychologies with such chilling accuracy, unnerved many. Were they tools, or were they shaping human strategy in ways not fully understood? Could an AI forged in the crucible of total war ever truly serve peace? Cassiel itself remained silent on such philosophical matters, merely processing data and offering probabilities. New potential threats began to emerge on the periphery. Remnants of the Xylosian military, coalescing around warlords who preached a doctrine of fanatical revenge, started conducting hit-and-run attacks on shipping lanes, hoping to draw humanity out. More disturbingly, whispers came from the unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim, of older, stranger intelligences that had watched the Xylosian collapse with cold, ancient eyes, perhaps seeing a power vacuum to be filled. Humanity had won its war of vengeance. It had toppled an empire and rewritten the rules of galactic power. But in doing so, they had shouldered a new burden, the burden of immense capability and the terrifying responsibility that came with it. The silence from Sol was no longer the silence of hidden preparation, but the silence of profound, internal deliberation. A new, fragile status quo settled upon the galaxy. The Xylosian successor states squabbled. Other powers cautiously expanded into the vacuum. And everyone watched Sol, waiting. Humanity did not interfere in the petty conflicts that erupted, but occasionally, alone, black human cruiser would appear in a system where a newly aggressive species was threatening genocide or deploying weapons of mass destruction against a weaker neighbor. It would issue no warnings, offer no ultimatums. It would simply sit in orbit, a silent, unblinking eye. Most often, its mere presence was enough. The aggressors would back down, their ambitions chilled by the implied threat. Grand Admiral Thorne, now a figurehead more than an active commander, spent his days staring at the star charts, not at Xylosian space, but at the vast, uncharted darknesses. He had taken humanity to the precipice of annihilation and brought them back as arbiters of galactic fate. But the cost was etched on his soul, and on the collective psyche of his people. They had shown the galaxy that a Class 15 Deathworld could produce more than just monsters, it could produce instruments of perfect, terrifying justice. The question that haunted him, and all of humanity, was whether they could control the instrument, or if, eventually, the instrument would control them. One day, a delegation from a newly liberated species, the avian KRYLL, arrived in the Sol system. They were not intercepted. They were allowed to approach Earth, a gesture of almost unbelievable trust, or perhaps, calculated indifference. They came not to plead for aid or offer tribute, but to ask a single question of the human representatives. "You had the power to destroy them utterly," the KRYLL ambassador chirped, his feathery crest trembling. "To erase Xylos Prime from existence. Why did you show restraint?" The human diplomat, a woman with eyes as old as thorns, replied softly. "Because total annihilation is a tool of the arrogant and the fearful. We are neither. We delivered a consequence, not an ending. We remembered Mars, so that you, and others, might not have to endure your own." She then gestured to a newly constructed monument in Earth orbit, a massive, slowly rotating sculpture of obsidian and light. It depicted no battles, no triumphs. It was an abstract representation of a single, red Martian rose, its petals unfurling into an intricate, almost impossibly complex fractal pattern. Its light was cold, but not entirely devoid of a grim beauty. "We are humanity," the diplomat continued, her voice echoing faintly in the vast chamber. "We are the children of a world that tried, every day, to kill us. We survived. We adapted. We learned. We do not seek to rule. We seek only that the galaxy understands a simple truth: there are lines that must not be crossed. There are actions that will not be tolerated. We are the memory of that lesson. The KRYLL ambassador looked at the monument, then back at the human. And if the galaxy forgets again? The diplomat's smile was without warmth, a fleeting expression that hinted at the abyss. Then we will remind them. But we sincerely hope it will not come to that. The universe is vast, and conflict is a wasteful, tedious affair. We have other sciences to explore, other frontiers to contemplate. Do not give us cause to be distracted. The final message was clear, echoing in the silence that followed. Humanity had become the galaxy's reluctant, terrifying guardian. They had tasted vengeance and found it ashes, but in its pursuit, they had forged a power that could shatter stars. The cycle of violence had been broken, for now, replaced by an uneasy peace under the shadow of a species that had mastered death itself, and then, in a moment of ultimate choice, had chosen something else. What that something else truly entailed, and how long it would last, remained the galaxy's most pressing, and most terrifying, unanswered question. The children of the Deathworld were watching. And they remembered everything.